The world seemed bleak and colorless when I lost my beloved husband, Daniel. It was an accident, sudden, unexpected. My entire world shattered in an instant. Holding our 3-month-old baby girl, Ella, close to my chest, the weight of our loss bore down on me, nearly crushing my spirit. But as the days turned into nights and weeks, transitioned into months, the tiny being in my arms gave me a reason to keep moving. As Ella grew, we created our own little universe. Our bond strengthened with every smile, every laugh, and every cry. I would often find solace in watching her sleep, her tiny fingers curled into a fist, and her soft breathing reassuring me of life's delicate beauty. "Mama, why do I not have a dada like Lily from school?" Ella once asked, her innocent blue eyes searching my face for answers. Taking a deep breath, I responded, "Your dada loved you very much, sweetie. He's watching over us from the stars. Whenever you miss him, just look up at the night sky and he'll be there, shining brightly just for you." Ella pondered over my words for a moment, then wrapped her small arms around my neck. "It's okay, Mama. We have each other." Tears welled up in my eyes. Yes, my love always. Our days were filled with simple pleasures. We had a routine. Morning walks in the park, reading stories under the old oak tree, making daisy chains, and laughing over ice creams that dripped down our hands. One particular day, as we sat under our favorite tree, Ella, now 5, looked up with her brilliant eyes and said, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you, strong and happy." I chuckled, pulling her into a hug. "And I hope, my darling, you'll always find joy and never face the storms I did." We were two halves of a whole, navigating life, understanding the depth of our love and cherishing the moments that came our way. Little did I know that the storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, ready to challenge the foundation we had built over the years. The years flew by, and Ella blossomed into a young woman of grace and beauty. It was on a bright summer afternoon when she came home with a radiance I hadn't seen in a while. The house echoed with her excitement, and I could hear her humming a tune as she hurriedly climbed the stairs. "Mom!" she called out, entering the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "I have something to tell you." I looked up from the vegetables I was chopping, and the sparkle in her eyes piqued my interest. "All right, spill it," I said with a smile, wiping my hands on a towel. Ella took a deep breath, her cheeks a rosy hue. "I met someone, Mom." Her declaration filled the room, and for a brief moment, a flurry of emotions coursed through me. My little girl, who once held my hand and spoke of stars, was now sharing tales of her heart. I couldn't help but feel a mix of joy, nostalgia, and the ever-present protective instinct. "That's wonderful, darling," I replied, trying to gauge her feelings. "Tell me about him." "He's different," Ella started, choosing her words carefully. "He's passionate, ambitious, and sees the world so differently. I think I really like him." I nodded, listening intently. "How did you two meet?" "At the library," she said, a fond smile forming. "He was reading poetry, and we just started talking. One thing led to another, and before we knew it, hours had passed. We chatted late into the evening about James, with Ella sharing snippets of their conversations and moments they'd spent together. However, a small voice in my head urged caution. Love, as beautiful as it is, can also be blinding. A few weeks later, Ella arranged for us to meet James. The day arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. I wanted so much for Ella's choice to be right for her. As the doorbell rang, Ella hurriedly answered, and in walked James. Tall, with a sharply chiseled face, his presence dominated the room. Yet there was something in his demeanor, an air of arrogance, perhaps, that set me on edge. "James, this is my mom," Ella introduced, her hand tucked into his. "Mom, meet James." "Pleasure to meet you, James," I said, extending my hand. He looked at it briefly before shaking it, his grip firm, almost too firm. The evening was filled with polite conversations, with James speaking at length about his achievements and plans. However, his occasional curt replies and the way he often interrupted Ella left a sour taste in my mouth. Later that night, as I was tidying up, Ella came into the kitchen. "So, what do you think?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. He seems determined. But remember, love is also about respect, understanding, and kindness. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know, Mom. Give it time." I hugged her close, hoping that my instincts were wrong, and that this new chapter in Ella's life would be filled with happiness. Months turned into a whirlwind of dates, outings, and late-night phone calls for Ella and James. The intensity of their relationship was palpable, and I watched from the sidelines, hoping for the best while still harboring reservations. One crisp autumn evening, Ella entered our home with a glow that seemed to light up the entire room. A delicate, gleaming diamond adorned her left ring finger. She barely had her coat off before she was rushing into the living room, her excitement impossible to contain. "Mom!" she beamed, extending her hand for me to see the ring. I was momentarily taken aback, my emotions a mix of happiness for Ella and the nagging worry that had never quite gone away. But seeing the joy in Ella's eyes, I swallowed my concerns and enveloped her in a tight embrace. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I whispered, pulling back to look at her. "How did he ask?" Ella's eyes took on a dreamy quality. It was at the park, our special spot. He'd set up a surprise picnic with candles, and when I arrived, he was reciting a poem he'd written for me. Then, in the soft glow of the evening, he got down on one knee. It sounded romantic, and a part of me wanted to get swept up in the fairy tale she painted. He truly went all out. "I'm happy for you, dear." Over the next few weeks, our home was abuzz with wedding plans. Invitations, dresses, venues. Everything seemed like a blur. Ella was on cloud 9, and her happiness was infectious. However, the few times I interacted with James during these preparations, I couldn't shake off the unease his demeanor caused. One afternoon, as I was sifting through invitation designs, James and Ella had a disagreement over the guest list. His voice was raised, his tone sharp. "Why do you need to invite all these people? Most of them are your mother's friends, not ours," James argued. Ella, trying to keep the peace, replied, "James, it's our wedding. Both our families and friends should be there. And yes, some of Mom's close friends watched me grow up. They're like family." He scoffed, "Seems like she's running the show." Hearing this, I intervened. "James, this is a special day for both of you. It's important to make decisions together." His gaze locked onto mine, cold and unyielding. "Of course, Chloe. But it's our wedding, not yours." Ella stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "Let's take a break, both of you. We can revisit this later." I gave a small nod, retreating to my room. The confrontation had solidified my fears, but every time I tried to voice my concerns, Ella brushed them aside, attributing them to wedding stress. The day of the engagement party arrived. Friends and family gathered, showering the couple with love and blessings. Yet, through the merriment, I couldn't help but sense the undercurrents of tension. That night, as the last guest left and Ella and I sat, exhausted, on the couch, she leaned into me. "Mom, I know you have your doubts, but I love him." I sighed, brushing a strand of hair off her face. I just want you to be happy and treated with the love and respect you deserve." She smiled softly. "I know, Mom. I promise everything will be perfect." Little did we know, the road ahead would be anything but. After the wedding, a veil of silence seemed to descend upon our once close-knit relationship. Ella and James moved into a house on the other side of town, and my visits to their home were limited. I missed our daily chats, our shared laughter, and the bond that had always been our stronghold. Ella's voice on our occasional phone calls sounded distant, often hurried, and I felt a chasm widening between us. One evening, I decided to surprise Ella with a visit. Arriving at their home, I noticed the unkempt garden with overgrown grass and wilting flowers. It was unlike Ella, who had always been passionate about gardening. I rang the doorbell and waited. Ella opened the door, looking drained and pale, her once vibrant eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Mom," she whispered, sounding genuinely surprised. Before I could respond, a voice from inside called out, "Ella!" "It's Mom, James," Ella replied, her voice wavering slightly. I stepped inside, taking in the mess of unwashed dishes, scattered papers, and general disarray. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you've been," I began, my heart heavy. James appeared, a forced smile on his face. "Chloe, this is unexpected." "I just wanted to spend some time with Ella," I responded, trying to keep my tone even. James's eyes flicked between Ella and me. "Sure, just make sure it's not too long. We have plans." Ella gave a weak nod, leading me to the living room. We sat, the silence punctuated only by the ticking of the clock. "Ella," I started gently, "is everything okay? You seem—" She took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting. "It's just—" I reached out, taking her hands in mine. "Darling, you can always talk to me, no matter what." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I know, Mom. It's just a phase. We'll get through it." The weight of her unspoken words hung heavy in the room. My instincts screamed that something was amiss, but without Ella opening up, I was at a loss. As I was leaving, I pulled her into a tight embrace. "Remember, you're not alone. You have me." She whispered back almost inaudibly, "I know, Mom. I love you." Days turned into weeks, and my concern grew with every passing moment. Each time I tried reaching out, there seemed to be a wall that neither of us could breach. Ella's life appeared to be spiraling, and I felt helpless, watching from the outside. Late one night, a call from an unknown number lit up my phone. Answering it, I was met with sobs. "Mom," Ella's voice trembled, "I need you." My heart raced as I grabbed my keys, the urgency in her voice echoing in my ears. The dark days had descended, but I was determined to bring my daughter back to the light. The drive to Ella's home felt like an eternity. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more harrowing than the last. When I arrived, the house was eerily silent, the only light emanating from the living room window. I didn't bother knocking, pushing the door open. Inside, I found Ella sitting on the floor, her back against the sofa, tears streaming down her face. I rushed to her side, pulling her into my arms. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, taking a shuddering breath. He lost his temper again, Mom. He threw a vase at me, and then he left." Her voice trailed off, her fingers tracing the red mark on her forearm where the vase had struck. Anger and despair welled up inside me. "Ella, this has to stop. You can't go on like this." She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and defeat. "I thought he'd change, Mom. I thought our love would be enough. But every time he gets angry, it just gets worse." I cupped her face, making her look at me. "You deserve so much better than this, Ella. No one should ever make you feel afraid or less than." She nodded, burying her face in my shoulder. "I know, Mom. But I'm scared. What if he comes after me?" "We'll deal with it," I said, determination flooding me. "But right now, you're coming home with me." We packed a few essentials, and just as we were about to leave, James's car pulled into the driveway. Panic flashed in Ella's eyes. "Mom, we need to go. Now." I took her hand, leading her towards the back door, but before we could make our exit, James stormed in. "Where do you think you're going, Ella?" He spat, his eyes dark with rage. "She's coming with me," I interjected, placing myself protectively between him and Ella. He laughed coldly. "And what do you think you can do, Chloe?" Before I could respond, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder. James's face drained of color. "What have you done?" Ella, with newfound courage, replied, "I called the police. James, I won't let you hurt me anymore." Moments later, police officers entered the house, arresting James. As they led him away, handcuffed, I held Ella close. We watched in silence, knowing that the road ahead would be challenging. But with the first step taken, there was hope. That night, back at my home, we sat together, sipping on hot cocoa, a small semblance of the old times. "Thank you, Mom," Ella whispered. I squeezed her hand. "Always, my love. Always." The decision to stand up against James, to bring him to justice, was only the beginning. But as a mother, there was nothing I wouldn't do to protect my child. The weeks following James's arrest were a tumultuous blend of court hearings, counseling sessions, and quiet moments where Ella and I attempted to rebuild the fragments of our shattered lives. With every passing day, the weight of what she had endured became evident, but so too did her indomitable spirit. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ella spoke up, her voice contemplative. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about my life, about the choices I made and where they led me." I looked over, giving her an encouraging nod. "And what have you realized?" She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "That sometimes we wear blinders. We choose to see only what we want, ignoring the red flags, the warnings. I convinced myself that love was enough to change James, to erase his flaws, but in doing so, I lost myself." My heart ached for her, for the pain she had gone through. "Ella, we all make mistakes, but it's never too late to make things right, to find your path again." Ella smiled weakly. "I know, and that's what I want to do. I want to go back to school, finish my degree, maybe even open that little bakery I always dreamed of." My eyes welled up with tears of pride. "That sounds wonderful, and I'll be right here, cheering you on every step of the way." She leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice soft. "I know. Thank you, Mom, for everything." The next few months were transformative. Ella re-enrolled in college, taking up courses she had left behind. She immersed herself in her studies, finding solace in learning and the company of friends who supported her journey. The dream of her bakery began to take shape, and together we would spend weekends testing out recipes, laughing at failed experiments, and celebrating the successes. One day, as we decorated cupcakes in the kitchen, Ella looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "Mom, I've been offered an internship at a renowned patisserie in Paris. It's a 6-month program." I paused, processing the news. "That's amazing, Ella, but are you sure you're ready?" She nodded, determination evident in her posture. "I need this, Mom. To rediscover myself, to find my passion again." I hugged her tightly. "Then you should go. Spread your wings, just promise to come back to me." Ella chuckled, wiping away her tears. "Always. This will always be home." The day Ella left for Paris was bittersweet. Watching her embark on this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and sorrow. But above all, I felt hope. Ella's time in Paris was transformative. She thrived, honing her skills and building connections. Her letters home were filled with tales of her adventures, of the people she met, and the lessons she learned. By the time she returned, Ella was a changed woman, stronger, more confident, and ready to take on the world. She opened her bakery, which quickly gained popularity. But more than the success, it was the joy she radiated that marked the real turning point. Life has a way of testing us, of pushing us to our limits. But as Ella's journey showed, with love, resilience, and the unwavering support of family, it's possible to emerge from the darkest days into the light of a new...
Below the knee. My name is Barbara, and to say that life has been good to me would be an understatement. At 23, I've already achieved what some people spend a lifetime striving for: a fulfilling career, meaningful friendships, and a clear sense of direction. Not to gloat, but I'm the head of sales at Everline Corp, a high-flying company with operations across multiple countries. It's an intense, high-stakes job, but I absolutely love it. Every morning, I wake up eager to face the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. I remember my first day at Everline like it was yesterday. I was a fresh-faced college graduate dressed in my most professional outfit, a blazer and pencil skirt that I had splurged on, eager to make a good impression. My boss at the time, Sarah, welcomed me warmly. "Barbara, we've heard a lot of good things about you. Welcome to the team," she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here," I replied, my voice tinged with both enthusiasm and nervousness. Fast forward a few years, and not only did I surpass my own expectations, but I also became the youngest head of sales in the history of the company. When I was promoted, Sarah came to my new office with a grin that was almost as big as mine. "You've earned every bit of this, Barbara. We're so proud to have you lead the team," she declared. "It's a dream come true, honestly," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "I can't wait to push Everline to new heights." But my journey to the top wasn't just about sales targets and revenue growth. It was also about the people who became part of my life along the way. One person, in particular, stood out: Jason. Jason was a sales associate who joined Everline a year after I did. We clicked instantly. His cubicle was right next to mine, and our friendship grew from casual office banter to a genuine bond. We shared sales tips, celebrated each other's victories, and even suffered through tough quarters together. "You killed that presentation, Barbara," he'd exclaim after a particularly successful meeting with clients. "And you were brilliant in the QA session," I'd respond. "Seriously, Jason, where'd you learn to handle objections like that?" "From watching you," he'd say with a wink. We were a dynamic duo, and I valued our friendship deeply. It's rare to find someone you can both work with effectively and genuinely like as a person. That's why, when he invited me to his sister's wedding, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to celebrate not just his family's joy, but also our friendship. Little did I know that this event would reveal the cracks in the facade, shattering my perception of someone I had considered a close friend. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's a story for another chapter. For now, I'll say this: life was good. I had a job I loved, a friend I trusted, and a future that seemed as bright as ever. If someone had told me how quickly things could unravel, I might not have believed them. But sometimes, life has a way of showing us that not everything is as perfect as it seems, teaching us lessons we didn't know we needed to learn. A regular Tuesday morning in the office turned extraordinary when Jason swung by my desk, a big grin spreading across his face. His eyes were practically glowing, a look that I had come to associate with good news or a successful deal. "Barbara, can I borrow you for a sec?" he asked, his voice filled with an eager excitement. "Sure, what's up?" I said, minimizing the spreadsheet I had been engrossed in. Jason took a deep breath, his grin widening. "So, my sister's getting married this weekend? It's kind of a big deal, family from all over are flying in. Would you be interested in coming? I think it'll be a lot of fun, and it would mean a lot to me." I looked up from my screen, caught a little off guard, but pleasantly surprised. Weddings are special, a celebration of love and unity, and to be invited to one felt like an honor. Plus, this was Jason, my work buddy, my confidant in all things sales and streaming series. This was a no-brainer. "Wow, Jason! Thank you for inviting me," I exclaimed, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I'd love to be there." Jason's face broke into an even bigger smile, if that was possible. "Fantastic! My sister will be thrilled to have you there. She's heard so much about you. Feels like you're already part of the family." This made me chuckle. "Well, I'm honored. What's the dress code? Don't want to show up underdressed or anything." Jason laughed. "Oh, you know weddings. Everyone's an unofficial contestant in a fashion show. But semi-formal should do it. My sister's not the super traditional kind. I made a mental note to go dress shopping after work. Got it semi-formal. Anything else I should know?" He paused, as if contemplating whether to say more, then shrugged it off. "Just be prepared for some boisterous relatives and a whole lot of dancing." "Dancing, you say? You're on!" We both laughed, sealing the plan that promised a weekend of fun and celebration. As Jason walked away, a sense of warmth washed over me. Here was a friendship that felt as effortless as it was meaningful, a person I could share the highs and lows of life with both at work and outside of it. I returned to my spreadsheet, but couldn't focus right away. My mind kept drifting back to the wedding invitation. In hindsight, perhaps I should have read more into Jason's pause, pondered why he seemed to hesitate. But hindsight is 20/20, and at that moment, life was simply too good to question. I went back to crunching numbers and planning sales strategies, blissfully unaware that this wedding would be the backdrop against which all my illusions would come crashing down. It would turn out to be an event that tested not just my patience, but my very perception of friendship and loyalty. But for now, I was happy, excited, and completely in the dark about the storm that was brewing. Isn't it funny how life sets you up sometimes? One moment you're on cloud 9, believing that you've got everything figured out, and the next you're plummeting back to Earth, a fallen Icarus with burnt wings. But let's not get ahead of the story. The descent comes later. For now, the sky was clear, and I was soaring. The day of the wedding arrived with much anticipation. I had spent hours shopping for the perfect semi-formal dress, a delicate balance of elegance and understatement. It was a lovely off-shoulder gown that hit just below the knee, simple yet sophisticated. I felt confident and excited as I stepped into the opulent ballroom where the wedding was being held. Jason greeted me as I walked in, his face lighting up at the sight of me. "Barbara, you made it! You look fantastic!" "Thank you, Jason. This place looks incredible, and you clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, gesturing to his well-tailored suit. He chuckled. "Well, weddings are a good excuse to look fancy. Come on, let me introduce you to some people." As we mingled with the crowd, I couldn't help but feel like I was part of something special. Jason's family was warm and inviting, and it seemed like I had been seamlessly integrated into the celebration. That feeling, however, was about to be short-lived. We finally got to a table where a woman was sitting, her eyes scanning the room with an air of detachment. This was Melissa, Jason's wife. I had heard about her, but we'd never met. As Jason introduced us, I extended my hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Melissa. Jason speaks highly of you." Melissa took my hand briefly, her grip tepid at best. "Yes, well, he's mentioned you too." A chill ran through me. Her tone was colder than her handshake, but I brushed it off, chalking it up to wedding jitters or some kind of stress. We took our seats, and the ceremony was beautiful. I felt myself getting caught up in the romantic atmosphere, the exchanging of vows, and the promise of eternal love. Then came the reception, and with it, the unveiling of a far less pleasant side of my work. Friend's life. As dinner was served and small talk flowed around the tables, Melissa leaned over and said, "I don't know how they do things where you're from, Barbara, but in our circle, we don't typically wear dresses like that." I looked down at my carefully selected outfit, then back at Melissa, stunned. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I didn't mean to offend anyone." But she didn't stop there. "It's not just the dress, dear. It's your entire demeanor. You're carrying yourself as if you're the guest of honor." I glanced at Jason, who was seated right next to Melissa. He was avoiding eye contact, his gaze fixated on his dinner plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. The weight of what was happening started to sink in. Here I was, at a celebration of love and unity, being singled out and demeaned. The worst part, Jason, the very person who had invited me into this setting, The person who I had trusted as a friend was letting it happen. I clenched my napkin under the table, struggling to maintain my composure. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Melissa." It was not my intention to come across as disrespectful. For a moment, she looked as if she might say more, but she turned her attention back to her meal, leaving me to stew in my own discomfort and rising indignation. It became abundantly clear that I was no longer welcome, not just at this table, but in this chapter of my life that involved Jason. My so-called friend had let me walk into an emotional ambush and did nothing to intervene. Feeling a potent mix of humiliation and betrayal, I decided that I had had enough. Quietly excusing myself, I left the wedding, not looking back, even as my heels clicked faster with each step away from the gathering. As I drove home, I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, a mixture of disappointment and a sense of profound loss. I had lost not just an evening to awkwardness and insult, but possibly a friendship that I had genuinely valued. And as I navigated the winding roads that led me back to my own reality, I couldn't help but wonder, was this friendship ever real to begin with? Little did I know, the unraveling had only just begun. The fallout from the wedding weighed heavily on me over the next couple of days. I couldn't shake off the sense of betrayal and disrespect, a haze that darkened everything, even the bright fluorescent lights of my office. I got into work, booted up my computer, and tried to immerse myself in sales reports and client emails, but my thoughts kept returning to that night. It was then that my phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. A text message from Jason popped up on the screen. "Hey Barbara, can we talk?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me wanted to ignore the message, to cut my losses and move on, but another part wanted closure, an explanation for why he allowed his wife to treat me the way she did. With a sigh, I typed back, "Sure, what's on your mind?" Within seconds, his reply appeared. "I'm really sorry about what happened at the wedding. I should have stepped in. I feel terrible." My eyes narrowed at the screen. An apology was a good start, but it was too little, too late. If he had stepped in at the moment, as he should have, we wouldn't be in this mess. Deciding that a text conversation wouldn't suffice for this kind of dialogue, I summoned him to my office later that day. When he walked in, the confident, cheerful Jason I knew seemed replaced by a subdued, almost pitiable figure. "Please, have a seat," I gestured to the chair across my desk. "Barbara, he began, but I cut him off. "Save it. Your text said you're sorry, but I'd like to know. Sorry for what, exactly? For the way your wife treated me or for the fact that you sat there and did nothing?" Jason lowered his eyes, both. "I should have done something, said something. I didn't handle it well, and I regret it." "You regret it?" I couldn't help but raise my voice, my patience waning. "Regret doesn't erase humiliation, Jason. It doesn't rebuild broken trust." "I know, and there's nothing I can do to change what happened, but I'm hoping we can move past this," he pleaded. I looked at him, my eyes narrowing. "Move past this. You let your wife insult me for nearly 2 hours. You invited me to a family event and allowed me to be disrespected. This isn't something we can just move past." "Barbara, you have to understand," he sighed deeply. "Melissa can be insecure and—" "Insecure?" I interrupted again, incredulous. "Your wife's insecurities don't give either of you the right to demean me. That's not how friendships work. That's not how decent human beings treat each other." Jason seemed to deflate entirely, his eyes clouded with regret. But for me, regret was no longer enough. "I'm sorry, but this isn't just about a spoiled evening or an awkward social fox pass, Jason. This is about integrity, loyalty, and respect. You showed none of those things that night, and you can't text those back into existence." He nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. "I understand. I messed up, big time, and I'll have to live with that." "Yes, you will," I affirmed, my voice tinged with finality. "As far as our professional relationship is concerned, consider yourself on thin ice. I expect nothing short of impeccable behavior and performance from you moving forward." "Understood," he said, standing up to leave. As he walked out, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for a friendship lost. But there was also a newfound sense of clarity and resolve. This was more than just an uncomfortable dinner or an embarrassing scene. It was an unveiling of character, or lack thereof. And while his apology might have been a step toward atonement, it did nothing to rebuild the trust that was shattered that night. The empty words hung in the air long after he left, a ghost of what our friendship used to be. But some ghosts are better left uninvited. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Jason and me simmered beneath the professional facade we both maintained. While I did my best to put the episode behind me, focusing on my duties as head of sales, I noticed his performance began to decline. Deadlines were missed, and client follow-ups lagged. It was as though the breakdown in our personal relationship had seeped into his professional life, affecting his capability to do his job well. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, attributing his lackluster work to personal stress, maybe stemming from his marriage. But the kindness was met with more negligence on his part, almost as if he was daring me to fire him. I had reached my limit. One morning, I decided it was time for another face-to-face meeting. I emailed him. "Jason, please come to my office at 2 p.m. We need to discuss your recent performance." Promptly at 2, Jason knocked on my office door. "Come in," I called out, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Jason entered, his eyes downcast as he took a seat. I steeled myself, looking him squarely in the eyes. "Jason, we need to talk about your recent performance. It's not up to the mark. You've been missing deadlines and dropping the ball on major accounts. What's going on?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've had a lot on my mind recently. I know that's no excuse, but I can improve." "A lot on your mind? We all have personal issues, Jason, but they shouldn't spill into our work. Certainly not to this extent," I retorted. Jason was silent, unable to come up with a defense. "As much as it pains me to do this," I began, pulling up his employment file on my computer, "effective immediately, you're terminated from your position." Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is this because of the wedding?" "In part, yes," I replied, "but more importantly, it's because you've not been performing your duties well. If you remember, you were already on thin ice." He looked shattered, the weight of the situation finally dawning on him. "So, that's it then. You're just going to fire me?" "I've given you ample opportunities to improve, to prove that you're more than the mistake you made at the wedding. But you've consistently shown me that you're not," I said, my voice tinged with disappointment more than anger. "I can't have someone on my team who I can't rely on, personally or professionally." He sighed, a mixture of remorse and resignation washing over his face. "I understand, Barbara. I've messed up, and this is the consequence. I never wanted it to come to this." "I didn't want this either, Jason," I said, genuinely sad to see how far we'd fallen. "But you've left me with no other option. You'll need to hand over all pending work to Sarah by the end of the day. Har will guide you through the exit process." Jason stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "I guess this is goodbye then." "Goodbye, Jason," I replied, not unkindly, as he walked out of my office and, effectively, out of my life. After he left, I sat there for a few moments, contemplating the complexity of human relationships. How someone could go from being a trusted friend to a glaring example of disloyalty and professional inadequacy was beyond me. Yet here I was, facing the fallout and cleaning up the mess. As I turned my attention back to my work, a sense of sadness mingled with relief washed over me. It was the end of an era, yes, but perhaps it was also the beginning of a chapter where trust and integrity took center stage. In that moment, I promised myself that, moving forward, I'd be even more cautious about who I let into my life, both professionally and personally, because the lines between the two weren't just blurred, they were deeply intertwined, capable of making or breaking you in more ways than one. My weekend had been rather uneventful. I'd spent the day catching up on chores, indulging in some Netflix, and basically doing everything I could to take my mind off the recent upheavals at work. The Jason saga felt like a distant memory, albeit one that still had a few lingering threads. I was just settling into my cozy reading nook with a cup of tea when a knock echoed at my door. It was odd for someone to visit unannounced, but perhaps it was just a package delivery or a neighbor. I got up and opened the door, and there, standing on my doorstep, was Melissa, Jason's wife. For a moment, time froze. Her presence was the last thing I expected, and my immediate reaction was one of disbelief. What could she possibly want? "May I come in?" she asked hesitantly, her voice a stark contrast to the accusing tone she had used at the wedding. Reluctantly, I stepped aside to let her enter. "What brings you here, Melissa?" She took a deep breath, clearly nervous. "I came to apologize, Barbara. I've had some time to think, and I realized how horribly wrong I was to treat you the way I did." I eyed her skeptically. "That's rich, coming from you. What's the catch, trying to get Jason his job back?" "No," she shook her head vehemently. "This isn't about Jason's job. This is about me making amends. I was terribly, unforgivably wrong, and I see that now." "So, you've suddenly had an epiphany?" I asked, my tone laced with incredulity. "I've had a reality check," she corrected. "Jason told me he got fired and why. And while I initially blamed you, it made me look at myself and the role I played in this whole mess." "Interesting," I said, taking a sip of my tea. "So you now understand that your petty jealousy and lack of manners have consequences?" "Yes," she nodded, swallowing hard, and I can't undo the past. "But I am truly sorry for the way I behaved and for putting Jason in that position." I stared at her, gauging the sincerity in her eyes. They seemed genuine, filled with regret and a newfound humility. Apology accepted, I finally said, breaking the silence that had enveloped the room. A look of relief washed over her face. "Thank you, Barbara. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but it means a lot." "Your apology is accepted, Melissa, but understand this. Jason isn't getting his job back, not because of what happened at the wedding, but because he wasn't doing it well." She nodded. "I understand. He's owned up to that too. We both have a lot of growing to do, it seems." "Yes, we all do," I agreed, "but some more urgently than others." With that, Melissa took her leave, thanking me again for giving her a chance to apologize. As I closed the door behind her, a strange sense of closure washed over me. It wasn't the neatly wrapped-up ending you read about in fairy tales, but it was an ending nonetheless. A conclusion to a chapter of my life marred by betrayal, disappointment, and a glaring lack of integrity. As I sat back down in my reading nook, my tea now lukewarm but my spirits lifted, I realized that sometimes the universe gives you these messy chapters to help you appreciate the good ones even more. Not every villain gets their comeuppance in the way you'd expect, and not every friendship survives the trials of character and circumstance. But every experience, good or bad, teaches you something valuable. In forgiving Melissa, I wasn't just letting her off the hook. I was setting myself free from the burden of resentment and bitterness. She had shown me the kind of person I never wanted to be, and for that, I was grateful. That night, I went to bed with a clear conscience and a lighter heart, ready to tackle whatever new challenges and opportunities awaited me in the days to come. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was an ending, and sometimes that's all you can ask